The security alarm at Morrison's grocery pierced through the Saturday afternoon calm like a knife through silk, but it wasn't the sound that made everyone freeze, it was the sight of the store manager, Harold Kingston, gripping the handles of a wheelchair while a young girl inside it sobbed uncontrollably, her paralyzed legs motionless as her upper body shook with terror. "Empty your bag right now," Harold commanded, his voice carrying across the produce section where mothers pulled their children closer and elderly shoppers turned away in discomfort. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 12, fumbled with her worn canvas bag with trembling fingers, spilling its contents onto her lap, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in tinfoil, $3 in crumpled bills, and a photograph of a man in a hospital bed that she clutched protectively against her chest. Marcus Chen was just trying to buy strawberries for his daughter Emma's 13th birthday cake when he heard the commotion, and something about the girl's terrified whimper made him abandon his basket and push through the gathering crowd. As a single father who'd raised Emma alone since his wife died in childbirth, he recognized the particular brand of fear in a child's eyes when they felt utterly alone in the world. The girl in the wheelchair wore a faded yellow dress that had been mended multiple times, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had come loose during the confrontation, and her thin arms bore the subtle marks of 4 insertions that Marcus knew too well from Emma's bout with leukemia 3 years ago. If you believe in standing up for those who can't stand for themselves, if you understand that sometimes heroes come in the form of tired single dads buying groceries, hit that like button and subscribe to Acts of Depth, where we share stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Marcus stepped forward, his work boots heavy on the linoleum floor. "What exactly is she accused of taking?" His voice cut through Harold's tirade with the quiet authority of someone who'd faced down worse bullies in boardrooms when he'd worked as a contractor before Emma's illness drained his savings and forced him into his current job driving delivery trucks. Harold's face reddened as he pointed at the girl. She was seen slipping something into her bag near the pharmacy section. "These people think they can take advantage of our sympathy, fake disabilities to steal from hardworking businesses." The words hit the air like poison, and the girl's sob turned into a gasp of disbelief. "I'm not faking," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I haven't walked since the accident 2 years ago." Marcus knelt beside the wheelchair, putting himself at the girl's eye level while deliberately turning his back on Harold, a gesture that made the manager's face purple with indignation. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, recognizing the expensive medical-grade wheelchair despite its worn appearance, the kind that cost more than most cars, and suggested someone had once cared deeply about this child's mobility. "Lily," she managed between hiccups. "Lily Blackstone. I wasn't stealing, I promise. I was just looking at the children's vitamins because..." She trailed off, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Because I wanted to see if they had the same kind my dad used to buy me," before, she couldn't finish, but Marcus saw her grip tighten on the photograph. Harold grabbed Marcus's shoulder, trying to pull him away. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back. This is a security matter, and the police are already on their way." But Marcus stood slowly, his 6-foot frame towering over the manager, 13 years of single parenthood having taught him when to be gentle and when to be immovable. "And what exactly are you going to tell them? That a paralyzed 12-year-old girl masterminded a vitamin heist?" The crowd was growing larger, phones coming out to record the confrontation, and Harold seemed to realize the optics of the situation but was too deep into his power trip to back down. "Store policy is clear. Any suspected shoplifting must be prosecuted to the full extent of the law." He turned to Lily with cold satisfaction. "Where are your parents? They'll be charged with negligence on top of the theft charges." Lily's composure finally shattered completely. "My mom died in the same accident that paralyzed me, and my dad," she held up the photograph, revealing a man who looked gaunt and pale, connected to multiple machines. "He's been in a coma for 8 months. I live with my aunt, but she works 3 jobs and couldn't come shopping with me today. I take the bus by myself because I don't want to be more of a burden than I already am." Marcus felt something break inside his chest, remembering Emma at home, healthy and whole, decorating for her own birthday party while this child sat here being humiliated for a crime she didn't commit. He pulled out his phone, not to record but to call his daughter. "Emma, "Honey, I'm going to be late with the strawberries." Something important came up. He listened for a moment, then said, "Yes, the kind of important that Mom would have stopped for." The mention of his late wife Sarah seemed to steel his resolve. Harold had called for backup, and 2 more store employees arrived, including a security guard named Brett who looked like he spent his off hours at the gym and his on hours hoping for real action. "You need to leave, sir," Brett said to Marcus, his hand resting on his radio. "This doesn't concern you." But Marcus had already made his decision, the same kind of split-second choice he'd made when he'd quit his corporate job to spend more time with Emma during her treatment, the kind that might cost him but felt fundamentally right. "Actually, it does concern me," Marcus said, pulling out his wallet and removing a business card he'd kept from his old life, one that still carried enough weight to make certain people pay attention. "I'm her advocate now, and if you so much as touch her wheelchair again without her permission, we'll be discussing assault charges on a minor with disabilities." It was a bluff wrapped in enough legal-sounding language to make Brett hesitate, and in that hesitation, Marcus saw his opening. He turned to the growing crowd, recognizing the power of public witness. "This young lady, Lily Blackstone, is being accused without evidence, detained against her will, and humiliated because she had the audacity to shop while disabled." His voice carried the same conviction that had once won him contracts worth millions, before he'd learned that some things mattered more than money. "Is this the kind of community we are? Is this who we want to be?" An elderly woman stepped forward, her walker clicking against the floor. "I saw the whole thing. That girl didn't take anything. She was just looking at the vitamins, touching the bottles like they were precious memories." Others began to murmur agreement, and Harold's certainty wavered like a flag in changing wind. But he'd gone too far to retreat without losing face, a trap of his own ego's making. That suggested she'd retreated somewhere inside herself, a coping mechanism Marcus recognized from Emma's darkest days in the hospital. The photograph of her father was pressed against her chest like armor. Marcus made another decision, pulling out his phone again. "Then I'm calling the Americans with Disabilities Act hotline. I'm sure they'll be very interested in how Morrison's grocery treats customers with mobility challenges." He began dialing, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, hello, I need to report an incident of discrimination in progress." Harold lunged for the phone, but Marcus simply stepped back, continuing his call while Brett the security guard looked increasingly uncomfortable. "The manager here has physically restrained a minor in a wheelchair, accused her of faking her paralysis, and is holding her against her will without evidence." The crowd was fully recording now, and Marcus could see the headlines forming in Harold's eyes: "Local store manager terrorizes orphan disabled child." That's when Lily spoke up, her voice stronger than before. "My father taught me that bullies only have the power we give them." She looked directly at Harold. "And I'm not giving you any more of mine." She began to will herself toward the exit, but Brett stepped in front of her, and in that moment, the situation escalated beyond mere confrontation into something darker. "You're not going anywhere," Brett said, reaching for the wheelchair's handles, but Marcus moved faster, placing himself between the security guard and Lily with the protective instinct of a father who'd spent too many nights standing guard over his own daughter's hospital bed. "Touch her and I'll make sure you never work security again," Marcus said quietly, and something in his eyes made Brett step back. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but that's when fate intervened in the form of a small bottle of children's vitamins falling from Brett's own pocket as he moved, the same brand Lily had been looking at, with a security tag still attached. The guard's face went white as he realized what had happened, and the crowd gasped collectively. Harold looked at his security guard with dawning horror, understanding that his zealous persecution of an innocent child had been protecting the actual thief on his own staff. Brett tried to run, but the crowd had formed an inadvertent barrier, phones raised like modern pitchforks, and he stumbled into a display of canned goods that crashed around him in a symphony of karma. Marcus didn't move to stop him. He stayed with Lily, one protective hand on her wheelchair, watching as Harold's world collapsed in real time. The manager stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, as 2 actual police officers arrived, having been summoned by Harold's own call. "We received a report of shoplifting," Officer Patricia Williams said, taking in the scene with experienced eyes that missed nothing: the crying child in the wheelchair, the protective father figure standing guard, the security guard on the ground surrounded by stolen vitamins that had fallen from his pockets, and the manager who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Would someone like to explain what's really going on here?" The elderly woman with the walker spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through enough injustice to recognize it instantly. "This manager accused that poor child of stealing, made horrible accusations about her faking her disability, while his own security guard was the actual thief." The crowd murmured agreement, showing their recorded videos to the officers, who watched with increasingly stern expressions. Lily finally released the photograph she'd been clutching, and Marcus saw the full image clearly for the first time. The man in the hospital bed was wearing a Rolex watch worth more than most people's cars, and the room he was in wasn't just any hospital room, it was a private suite at Cedars-Sinai, the kind that cost thousands per day. Something nagged at Marcus's memory, a news story from months ago about a wealthy tech entrepreneur who'd been in a car accident with his family, but before he could piece it together, Lily spoke to the officers. "I just wanted to buy vitamins like my dad used to get me," she said, her voice steady now that the truth was emerging. "The same kind he'd bring home in bulk because he said health was the best investment. Before the accident, before Mom died, before she gestured helplessly at the photograph. Before everything changed." Officer Williams knelt beside the wheelchair with practiced kindness. "What's your father's name, sweetheart?" "Richard Blackstone," Lily replied, and Marcus's memory clicked into place like a lock finding its key. Richard Blackstone, the software billionaire who'd revolutionized cloud computing, who'd been hit by a drunk driver 8 months ago, losing his wife and ending up in a coma while his daughter was paralyzed. The media had covered it extensively before moving on to the next tragedy, but here was the aftermath they'd ignored: a 12-year-old girl trying to maintain normalcy by shopping for vitamins alone. Harold's face had gone from red to white as he too recognized the name, no doubt calculating the astronomical lawsuit that was about to descend on Morrison's grocery like divine judgment. "Mr. Blackstone's daughter? But she's supposed to have full-time care, security, she's worth..." He cut himself off, but the damage was done. "Worth what?" Marcus asked dangerously. "Worth treating with basic human dignity. Worth not traumatizing over false accusations." He turned to Officer Williams. "I want to press charges against both the security guard for theft and the manager for false imprisonment and harassment of a minor with disabilities." But Lily raised her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of her billionaire father's boardroom presence that it silenced everyone despite coming from a 12-year-old in a wheelchair. "No charges," she said firmly. "My dad taught me that revenge and justice aren't the same thing." She looked at Harold with pity rather than anger. "You assumed I was worthless because I looked poor and disabled. You never considered I might be someone who mattered. But that's the point, everyone matters, regardless of what they look like or what's in their bank account." The wisdom hit harder because it came from a child who had every reason to be bitter, who had lost her mother, whose father lay comatose, who couldn't walk but still chose grace over vengeance. Harold began to cry, the kind of deep, shameful tears that come when you realize you've become someone you never meant to be. Brett was already in handcuffs, but Harold's punishment would be different. He'd have to live with the knowledge of what he'd become. Marcus watched as Officer Williams gently took Lily's statement while Officer Davis dealt with Brett, and something shifted in the air of Morrison's grocery, like watching a community remember its conscience. Customers who'd been silent began approaching Lily with small kindnesses. A woman offered her a bottle of water, a man brought over a chair for Marcus, and the elderly lady with the walker patted Lily's hand with grandmotherly affection. But it was what happened next that would haunt Harold Kingston for the rest of his life. A black SUV pulled up outside, and a woman in an expensive suit burst through the doors, her face a mask of controlled panic. "Lily. Oh my God, Lily, are you okay?" This was Jennifer Blackstone, Richard's sister and Lily's aunt, who despite working 3 jobs as Lily had mentioned, apparently did so by choice rather than necessity, running 3 different charity organizations her brother had founded. The misunderstanding would have been comedic if it weren't so revealing. Lily had interpreted her aunt's busy schedule as financial struggle rather than philanthropic dedication. "I'm fine, Aunt Jenny," Lily said, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she truly smiled. "This man helped me. He stood up for me when no one else would." She gestured to Marcus, who suddenly felt underdressed in his work clothes and steel-toed boots, but Jennifer Blackstone looked at him like he'd just handed her the moon. "You protected my niece." Jennifer's voice cracked with emotion. "You don't understand, since the accident, since Richard went into the coma, I've been terrified of something happening to Lily. She insists on maintaining her independence, going places alone, proving she's not defined by her chair." She pulled out a business card with hands that shook slightly. "Please, let me know how I can thank you." "Anything, absolutely anything." Marcus shook his head, thinking of Emma waiting at home. "No thanks necessary. I did what anyone should do." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The crowd had been content to watch until he'd intervened. He looked at Harold, who was now sitting on the floor, his manager's badge removed and placed beside him like a surrender flag. "Though I think Mr. Kingston here might benefit from understanding exactly who he chose to torment today." Jennifer's expression hardened as she turned to Harold, and Marcus saw the family resemblance to the billionaire in the photograph, the same sharp intelligence, the same capacity for both kindness and devastating precision. "Harold Kingston," she said, pulling out her phone. "Morrison's Grocery, managed by the Whitfield Corporation, whose board of directors includes my brother's golf partner, Thomas Whitfield." She began typing with the efficiency of someone used to solving problems with connections and capital. "Tommy. It's Jennifer Blackstone. We have a situation at one of your stores." The conversation that followed was brief but decisive, conducted in the calm tones of people who moved millions with their decisions. Harold watched his career evaporate in real time, each word another nail in the coffin of his authority. But Lily intervened again, wheeling herself over to her aunt. "Don't destroy him, Aunt Jenny. Transform him." The girl's moral clarity seemed to humble everyone present, including her aunt. Jennifer ended the call and looked at her niece with wonder. "You're just like your father. He always said the best revenge against small thinking was to force people to think bigger." She turned to Harold. "You'll keep your job, Mr. Kingston, but you'll be transferred to our foundation's workforce development program. You'll spend the next year working with disabled individuals seeking employment, learning to see capability where you once saw only limitation." It was redemption offered at a price. Harold would have to confront his prejudices daily, would have to grow or break. He nodded wordlessly, understanding that this child he tried to humble had instead given him a second chance he didn't deserve. Brett wouldn't be so lucky. Theft was theft, and the law would handle him accordingly. But Harold's transformation would be Lily's victory, proof that her father's philosophy of constructive justice lived on through her. Marcus felt a hand on his arm and found Lily looking up at him with those wise-beyond-years eyes. "Will you come visit my dad with me? I go every day after school. I tell him about people who prove the world is still good. I want to tell him about you." The invitation was so pure, so earnest, that Marcus felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. He thought of Emma, of teaching her to stand up for others, of the legacy Sarah would have wanted him to build. "I'd be honored," he said, and meant it. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood with Emma in Richard Blackstone's hospital room at Cedars-Sinai, watching as Lily read to her comatose father from a journal she'd been keeping. The room was nothing like Marcus had imagined. Yes, it was private and expensive, but it was also filled with children's drawings, photographs of family moments, and cards from employees at Richard's companies. This wasn't just a medical space, it was a shrine to hope, maintained by a 12-year-old who refused to give up on miracles. "And then Mr. Chen stood between me and the security guard, Dad," Lily read from her journal, her voice carrying the same storytelling gift that had made her father famous for his keynote speeches. "He wasn't afraid, even though he had nothing to gain. He just saw someone who needed help and decided to be the help." She looked up at the still figure in the bed. "Just like you taught me to do." Emma had brought strawberry cake, the same one Marcus had been shopping for that fateful day, and she and Lily had become fast friends despite the year between them. Watching them together, Emma walking, Lily rolling, Marcus saw how naturally children adapted to difference when adults didn't poison them with prejudice. Emma was teaching Lily the latest TikTok dances adapted for wheelchair users, while Lily helped Emma with her coding homework, having inherited her father's gift for technology. Jennifer Blackstone entered with someone unexpected, Harold Kingston, looking transformed in casual clothes rather than his manager's uniform, his face softer, humbler. Lily asked me to invite him, Jennifer explained to Marcus's surprised expression. She visits him at the foundation once a week, checking on his progress. It was hard to reconcile this quiet, thoughtful man with the tyrant from the grocery store, but 3 weeks of working with disabled job seekers had apparently begun the renovation of his soul. I wanted to apologize again, Harold said to Lily, who studied him with those penetrating eyes. And to thank you. I've learned more about strength in 3 weeks watching people with disabilities fight for opportunities than I learned in 20 years of management. He pulled out a folder. I've started a program at Morrison's, hiring people with disabilities for positions throughout the store, not just token roles but real jobs with advancement potential. Lily smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd known this would happen all along. People aren't their worst moments, Mr. Kingston. They're their next choices. She turned back to her father. Right, Dad? That's what you always said. And then, so softly Marcus almost missed it, Richard Blackstone's finger moved. Just a twitch, barely visible, but Lily saw it too, her breath catching as she grabbed her father's hand. Dad? Dad, can you hear me? The machines began registering increased activity, subtle changes that brought nurses running. Richard's eyes didn't open, but his fingers definitely closed around Lily's hand, the first voluntary movement in 8 months. The medical staff buzzed with controlled excitement while Lily kept talking, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face. Mr. Chen is here, Dad. The one I told you about. He saved me, just like you would have. Marcus found himself praying for the first time since Sarah's death, not for a miracle but for justice, for this brave child to get her father back, for goodness to be rewarded in a world that so often seemed to punish it. Emma took his hand, understanding without words that they were witnessing something sacred, something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of coincidence. Dr. Patel, the neurologist, examined Richard with barely contained optimism. This is significant. The patterns suggest he's responding to Lily's voice specifically. We've hoped for this, the emotional connection breaking through where medicine couldn't. She looked at Lily with professional admiration. Your daily visits, your constant talking to him, it's been therapy we couldn't replicate with any machine. Over the following days, Richard's recovery accelerated like a miracle in time-lapse. First fingers, then eyes fluttering, then a whispered word, Lily, that brought the entire medical staff to tears. Marcus and Emma visited daily, becoming part of the extended family that formed around this resurrection. Harold came too, reading business reports to Richard, trying to keep his mind engaged with familiar patterns. Even the elderly woman from the grocery store appeared, having tracked down Lily to bring homemade cookies. The day Richard Blackstone fully woke up, sitting up in bed and speaking in complete sentences, the media tried to make it about medical miracles and billionaire resilience. But those in the room knew better. It was about a 12-year-old girl who'd refused to give up, a single father who'd stood up for a stranger, a community that had chosen compassion over indifference, and a grocery store manager who'd learned that redemption was possible if you were brave enough to accept it. Richard's first full day of consciousness, he asked to meet Marcus privately. The billionaire, thin but alert, extended his hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. You protected my daughter when she was most vulnerable. Name your price, any amount, any request. Marcus thought of Emma, of their struggles, of the college fund he couldn't quite manage, but shook his head. Your daughter already paid me. She reminded me that standing up for others isn't about reward, it's about being the person your children can be proud of. He paused. Though if you're offering, maybe consider funding programs for single parents. We're all just trying to raise good kids in a tough world. Richard smiled, and Marcus saw Lily in that expression. Done. The Sarah Chen Foundation for Single Parents, named after your late wife, if you'll permit. Emma told Lily about her mother, how she was a social worker who believed in second chances. The gesture was so unexpected, so perfectly targeted at honoring Sarah's memory, that Marcus couldn't speak for a moment. 6 months later, at the foundation's launch event, Marcus watched Lily, still in her wheelchair but now surrounded by friends from her new adaptive sports team, cutting the ribbon with special scissors designed for limited mobility. Harold Kingston stood beside her, now the foundation's Director of Inclusive Employment, a position he'd earned through genuine transformation rather than corporate shuffling. Emma was there too, teaching a coding class to kids with disabilities, having been inspired by Lily to use her abilities to enable others. Richard Blackstone, walking with a cane but walking nonetheless, gave a speech about the grocery store incident that had started it all. My daughter was accused of being worthless by someone who couldn't see her worth. Marcus Chen saw it immediately because he wasn't looking at her limitations, he was looking at her humanity. That's the vision this foundation will spread. He paused, looking at his daughter with unmistakable pride. Lily taught us that everyone has value, but sometimes it takes courage to make others see it. The story could have ended there, with triumphant music and rolling credits, but life isn't a movie. It continued in smaller moments, Marcus and Richard becoming unlikely friends despite their different worlds, Harold mentoring young people with disabilities and finding purpose he'd never known in management, Emma and Lily starting a YouTube channel about adaptive living that went viral for all the right reasons. Brett, the security guard, served his time and emerged to find a job waiting at the foundation, Lily having argued that even those who'd done wrong deserved the chance to make it right. The Morrison's grocery where it all began installed a plaque by the vitamin aisle, on this spot, courage met compassion and changed lives. Stand up for those who cannot stand. Harold had insisted on it, a daily reminder of his worst moment that became his best teacher. Customers often paused there, reading the simple words, sometimes Googling the story, always leaving a little more aware of their power to intervene when witnessing injustice. Lily never walked again, but she flew in every other way that mattered, graduating valedictorian, earning a full scholarship to MIT, becoming a disability rights advocate whose TED Talk about the grocery store incident garnered millions of views. She began it with the words that had changed everything, "My name is Lily Blackstone, and I was accused of shoplifting vitamins I couldn't even reach. But a stranger named Marcus Chen reached them for me, not the vitamins, but dignity, justice, and hope." The ripples spread outward like disturbed water, touching lives in ways no one could track. A mother in Ohio stood up for a bullied child after watching Lily's talk. A manager in Texas hired his first disabled employee after reading Harold's transformation story. A billionaire in Silicon Valley restructured his entire company's accessibility policies after Richard Blackstone called him personally. Each action small in itself, together forming a wave of change that started with one single father deciding that a stranger's child was worth protecting. Marcus still drives his delivery truck, though he doesn't need to anymore. Richard's offered him executive positions dozens of times. But Marcus found his calling in the ordinary courage of daily life, in showing Emma through actions rather than words what it means to be good. Every morning, he passes Morrison's grocery on his route, and every morning, he remembers the moment he chose to step forward instead of stepping aside. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that standing up for others isn't about their worth but about your values, then carry that reminder with you. Share this story with someone who needs to remember their power to intervene, to protect, to transform injustice into opportunity. Subscribe to Acts of Depth for more stories that reveal the extraordinary courage hidden in ordinary moments, and remember, we all have the power to be someone's Marcus Chen, to see worth where others see weakness, to stand when everyone else remains seated. The question isn't whether you'll encounter your Morrison's grocery moment, but whether you'll recognize it when it arrives, whether you'll step forward when that child in the wheelchair needs someone to believe in their truth more than they fear the consequences of defending it.